Hello, Willowbrook family. Today's daily Devo is 2 Samuel chapter 2. Have you ever watched a movie and were totally lost? I mean, for whatever reason. Maybe the story was too complicated, or you just really didn't care about the characters, or you just had no idea what they were trying to accomplish to begin with. I have seen my share of movies like that. Now, even though a film may seem complicated, most really good screenplays are highly organized stories. The problem is that sometimes a director or a producer wanders off with their own interpretation and it kind of muddies up the water. But when you know the nuts and the bolts of a screenplay, you can better understand the story. One of the foundational elements in a movie is something called a sequence. A sequence is like a mini story that has a beginning, middle, and end. And so basically, when you string a series of sequences together, you have a finished movie. Now, 2 Samuel chapter 2 is like an action movie that's kind of hard to follow. So many different things happen with people that you never heard of, let alone even be able to pronounce their names. But when you break things down, you'll see that this chapter has a series of sequences that are tied together to create the larger story of chapter 2. So let's dive in. The chapter opens with a guidance sequence where David is asking the Lord what to do. King Saul has just been killed, and even though David has been told by God that he will be the anointed king, David doesn't want to assume and run ahead of God's timing. And this is something that we all should do. Inquire of the Lord every day. I personally need to do more asking and less assuming of God's will. God tells David to go to Hebron. So he and his family and his men go there and they settle for a while. Hebron is in Judah. When he arrives there, the men of Judah anoint David as their king. Now remember, David is anointed king of the area of Judah, not king over all of Israel, not at least yet. These men also tell David that Saul has been properly buried. Now, even though David and Saul have been at odds with each other, to say the least, David still respects the man Saul used to be and praises the men who buried him properly. David has class. And with that, our first sequence ends. Now, the next sequence is a power struggle sequence. A civil war, brother against brother. Abner, who led Saul's army, takes Saul's son Ishbosheth and makes him king over the rest of Israel. Now, I don't know what kind of man Ishbosheth was, but I really believe it was Abner who was the power behind the throne. So later, Abner and his men meet David's commander, Joab, and his army. And they meet at the famous pool of Gibeon. And a very strange sight unfolds. Both opposing armies decide to take 12 men from each side and let them fight it out. Well, it doesn't go as anyone thought it would. The 12 men on this side and the 12 men on that side, they pair up, they grab the enemy by the head and stab each other in the side all at the same time, and all 24 of them fall down dead. This is kind of what God thinks about division among his own people. So, this so shocks and enrages the two armies that they begin fighting very violently with each other. And the end result is that David's army, with Joab commanding, defeats Abner's army. And with that, the second sequence ends. The next sequence that quickly unfolds is the chase sequence. As the last sequence is ending, one of David's nephews, Asahel, who is an extremely fast runner, begins chasing Abner, who is a much better fighter. Abner keeps telling Asahel to turn back and chase someone else, but Asahel doesn't listen. A fight ensues and Abner kills Asahel. Now, Asahel has two brothers, Abishai and Joab, the commander of David's army. Well, when they see their brother killed, they begin chasing Abner. I told you, this was a chase sequence. So they catch up with Abner And Abner pleads for an end to this civil war, asking them how long kinsmen can go on killing each other. Joab agrees and lets Abner and his army leave. During this civil war, David's army lost 20 men, and Abner's army lost 360 men. Now, here's the final sequence of the chapter, and it's very short. David's army takes their fallen comrade, Asahel, and buries him in his father's tomb. And then they march off in the distance all night long to Hebron. Now, after this chapter, there's much more story to come. So, if you take these 4 sequences and string them together, what may it say to you and your story? First, your story should always begin with you asking the Lord what to do. Many steps can be wasted when we walk out of God's will. Second, be very aware of the dangers of power struggles. When God's people lose their unity, God is never pleased, and we just end up destroying each other. Third, be careful what you chase after. We can let our emotions and personal agenda so consume us that we find ourselves headed for ruin with no good way to stop. And finally, no matter what happens in your life, good and bad, heartache or victory, God always wants us moving in the direction that He has commanded us. Be assured, the story continues. So, Willowbrook family, as your story continues, have a great day in the Lord.